Hey everyone, I'm here in Ardublock to talk about subroutines today. For those of you who have coded before, you may recognize subroutines by the name function. In Ardublock, they choose to call them subroutines. That's just a little quirk we're going to have to get used to. And what a subroutine or a function is a list of commands. So it's a single command that consists of a lot of smaller, more simple commands. So the example I like to use is, house chores. So for example, your mom asks you to take out the trash. Taking out the trash consists of doing a lot of smaller steps. It consists of, you opening the trash can, taking the trash bag out, tying it, taking it outside, throwing it into the bin, coming back inside, putting a new trash bag in, and closing the lid. And yet your parents probably don't tell you to do each and every individual step. They just tell you to take out the trash and you understand it. So the question is, how do we get our robot to do something like that? How do we get our robot to respond to one single command as a bunch of smaller commands? And to demonstrate that, I have a simple code here that we should be familiar with at this point. So this is the code that gets our robot to begin in the stationary position. And then once our button is pressed, it will begin moving. And based on what I have here, it'll begin moving forward. Now, it's perfectly reasonable to just use these servo blocks to describe our motion when we're not doing a whole lot. When all we want to do is, I want to press this button and it goes forward. Doing this is perfectly reasonable. When this becomes a little more difficult is when we want to maybe get our robot to navigate some obstacle course. Once we are asking it to do several things, we're asking it to, go forward, then stop, then turn left at a very specific angle, and then go forward again, or back up a little bit, or turn left and right, do all these different things. Then it becomes a little more difficult to do just motions in terms of these servo blocks. It becomes a lot easier and a lot more user-friendly to start utilizing subroutines. So, I'm going to start by grabbing, well, first I'll start by showing you what these two subroutines are. So we got two right here in the bottom of the controls tab. One that is listed as subroutine commands, the other that is listed as just subroutine. So you need both of these in order to utilize your subroutines. Essentially what we do is we define our subroutine. We define, hey, we're going to make this list of commands, and it's going to be known as the single command. But without actually calling that subroutine, our robot doesn't enact it. It doesn't do anything. So for example, I'm going to bring this subroutine out here, and I'm going to take the two servo blocks that cause it to stop, and instead of having it in this while loop here, I'm going to place it into this subroutine. And I'm going to go ahead and rename this subroutine. I'm going to rename it stop because that's what these commands do. It makes it stop. So I have kids all the time who like to name their subroutines wild things. I would say, you're more than welcome to name your subroutines whatever you would like. I'm not going to stop you. However, I would strongly suggest that you name them in a way that you are going to be able to come back next week and the week after and the week after that and remember what each of these subroutines do, because otherwise they're not doing their job if you're confused as to what they mean. So I have stop here, and I'm going to go ahead and grab another subroutine commands block, and I'm going to place the servos that cause it to move forward in this one, and I'm going to call it forward because that's what it does. Now, if I were to upload this code to my robot right now, it would do nothing. It wouldn't do anything before I press the button. It wouldn't do anything after I press the button. It would do absolutely zero. And the reason for that is, while I've taught my robot what these subroutines mean, I've taught it, well, when I say stop, you should do these two things. You should make sure this servo motor has angle 90 and this servo motor has angle 90 in. Hopefully, if your robot's calibrated correctly, that'll stop it. And I've also taught it that forward means it should set pin 10 and pin 11 to these two angles respectively. However, if we look back over to the program block, nowhere in the program block have I actually told it to do those two things. So this is where our second subroutine block comes in, this one right here. So what I want to do is I want to change that subroutine block to mirror one of the names I have here. So for example, right here in this while loop, I want it to stop. I want my robot to be stopped. So I should say stop. Now what this is going to do is it's going to say, okay, I want to find the subroutine that is named the same as this one, which is this guy. And then I just want to do those commands that are inside it. And since these commands make the robot stop, putting stop here is going to utilize those commands and cause the robot to stop. Likewise, afterwards, once the button has been pressed, I would like the robot to go forward. So Ardublock is going to look at this, it's going to see forward, it's going to find the subroutine that says forward, and then it's just going to do the commands that are inside that subroutine. Very important is that case sensitivity does matter. In other words, if this is not capitalized, this should not be capitalized. It's very, very explicit about what subroutines it's grabbing. So if it's not exactly the same, if it's not written exactly the same as your subroutine's command block, it's going to have a hard time finding that subroutine. Now, at this point, this is generally how I introduce subroutines in a class, and I challenge the class to find the other subroutines, to define them, and that's how I get them to define turns and define like backwards. So I just say, all right, well, let's make another subroutine and let's see if we can get it to move backwards. Backward. All right. So the question is, what angles do these have to be? Because obviously it's not just 180 and 0, because that moves it forward. How do I get the robot to move backward? And the answer might not be immediately obvious, but some of you may see it. Well, if this makes it go forward, why don't I just do the exact opposite thing and have it go backwards? 180. And then I would challenge the students, hey, test it and see if that works. So instead of having forwards going here, I would say backwards goes there. They'd upload it, they'd test it out, they'd see if it does in fact move their robot backwards, and that's how they would properly construct each of their subroutines. You know, we do this again, we'll say, okay, well, we have forwards, backwards, and stop. Check, check, check. How about going left? How about turning left? What angles do these need to be to turn left? Well, I'm going to guess 0 and 0, and I'm going to make sure that this loop has a left subroutine in it so that that's what I'm actually testing. I'd upload my code, I'd test it out, I'd see if that works. Maybe that's not actually left. And I just realized I have misspelled left here, as well as put a backslash here. Don't do that. I will say that these subroutines are a little finicky about what they like to be named. So for example, that backslash, I'm pretty sure Ardublock would yell at me, or at least Arduino would yell at me and say that subroutine is not defined. You can't do that. They also don't like to start with numbers. They don't like having spaces in them. Any of your weird symbols. So for example, this is not a defined function or subroutine. That's something that Arduino will be very upset about, so I would not recommend doing that. Or, you know, maybe let the kids figure that out themselves. That's up to you. Although I would say after maybe the first couple tries that you should drop the hint that things like that are not going to work. So, hopefully with this, you can get each of your students to define. I spelled that correctly. Okay, to define and test each of their subroutines until they are at least having, at least they have these 5, the stop, forwards, backwards, left, and right. You can also have them do things like create a blink subroutine that blinks the LED. You can have them do half speed, backwards and forwards subroutines as well. But they should at least be able to, if given these 2, find the other 3. And they may need some help getting started. The whole process of creating new ones, then experimenting with them might be a little new and abstract to them at first, so they may need some help finding the first one and kind of you bringing them through that process. But afterwards, it should be fairly easy. All right, I think that's about all I've got to say. I hope this helped you guys out, and have fun experimenting with your racer. See you next time.